Can humans create biology in their body by thoughts alone?
Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. You have a threat, you have a danger, you have a crisis, you can't control something, you can't predict something, you have the perception that something's going to get worse in your life, and you switch on that primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system, and it mobilizes enormous amounts of energy for an emergency. And the brain goes into an aroused state and the body gets a rush of energy. And over time, we kind of get addicted to that rush of energy. Many people use the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion, and they become addicted to the life they don't even like. When we think about our problems, when we imagine some future worst case scenario in our mind, we begin to make the same chemistry in the brain and body as if the event was happening. You can get addicted to your own thoughts, and if you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, and the hormones of stress downregulate genes and create disease, then your thoughts can make you sick. And if your thoughts can make you sick, the really fundamental question is, can your thoughts make you well? And we discovered that if you can teach a person to notice they're getting aroused, that they notice they're getting impatient, they notice they're getting frustrated, and instead of quitting and saying, I can't do this, it's too hard, sit with themselves and work on lowering the volume to that emotion and settling the body back into the present moment. What we discovered that the act of doing that is reconditioning the body to a new mind, and sooner or later the body surrenders and there's a liberation of energies. I've seen people heal from like stage 4 cancers that had spread to their bones and to their organs, blind people seeing, deaf people hearing, people with ALS, muscular dystrophy, rare genetic disorders, Parkinson's disease. I've seen really incredible things happen. If you want to change, you have to break the habit of being yourself, and you teach people how to do this, and they begin to open their heart, they diminish those survival stress hormones, because the heart resets the baseline in the brain to tell the brain the trauma is over, the event is over, the stress is over. When the person's feeling the emotion of their future before it happens, they're beginning to change their gene expression in very, very profound ways. That's how powerful intention is when the body and mind are in the right state.
That's crazy to me. That's just unreal to me. So, hey guys, listen, we're all trying to get more productive. And the question is, how do you find a way to get an edge? I'm a big believer that if you're getting mentoring or you're in an environment that causes growth, a growth-based environment, that you're much more likely to grow and you're going to grow faster. And that's why I love Growth Day. Growth Day is an app that my friend Brendan Burchard has created that I'm a big fan of. Write this down, growthday.com/ed. So if you want to be more productive, by the way, he's asked me, I post videos in there every single Monday that get your day off to the right start. He's got about $5,000, $10,000 worth of courses that are in there that come with the app. Also, some of the top influencers in the world are all posting content in there on a regular basis, like having the Avengers of personal development and business in one app. And I'm honored that he asked me to be a part of it as well and contribute on a weekly basis, and I do. So go over there and get signed up. You're going to get a free, tuition-free voucher to go to an event with Brendan and myself and a bunch of other influencers as well. So you get a free event out of it also. So go to growthday.com/ed. That's growthday.com/ed. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Well, today's special because I have a dear friend here today. Also, probably my smartest friend. I think actually, for sure, my smartest friend. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He does these huge events all over the world that transforms people's lives. He's a corporate consultant. He's a thought leader. He's an expert on stuff that like neuroscience and epigenetics and quantum physics. He's just brilliant, and he changes people's lives. He changes people's lives. He's got an unbelievable documentary coming out called Source that we're going to talk about today as well. But more than anything, he's somebody that I rely on in my life for personal change, personal advice, and transformation. I miss him very much. I haven't seen him in a while, so it's great to be with him today. Dr. Joe Dispenza, welcome back, brother.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Ed. I'm so happy to be with you.
Yeah, I love you. Everybody, when you have an hour with Joe, you want to get right into content, and you want to get into that brain as much as you can, as quick as you can. And I know one of the things you've been telling me sort of behind the scenes now for a couple of years is, Ed, you're not going to believe what we're seeing at our events, these transformations, these changes. And so I want to start with like a broad question, then just let you go. And this is broad, but I think let's shock people right off the top. Can humans create biology in their body by thoughts alone?
I can tell you that I'm not saying this, but actually our data is saying this, that when you get a collective group of people together and something happens with a collective and you give them the right information, and I think science is that information. I think knowledge is power, but when you learn about yourself, that's self-empowerment. So we discovered that if you can get a group of people together and you can teach them new information, they're going to think differently. And if they can repeat that information, they could understand it conceptually, theoretically, philosophically. Um, they're installing circuitry in their brain. The more they understand what they're going to do with that information and why they're going to do it, the how gets easier. And they can assign meaning to whatever task they're going to use to change their biology. And normally, you just have to change the way you think, the way you act, and the way you feel.
Mhm.
And your biology can change. And so when you get people together and then you put them through the process of transformation, at the end of 7 days, um, uh, people with different genotypes, and everybody has their own genotype, right? Yours is different than mine.
Mhm.
Races, cultures, families are all different. And so at the end of 7 days, 77% of the people are making the same proteins because genes make proteins. They're expressing the same genes. So the flock, the herd, the school, the tribe is evolving collectively together by their interaction with information and then the application of that information for the experience. And we discovered that the experience inwardly, when it's done right, could look like a person's having some type of change in their life.
Mhm.
And their biology looks like at the end of 7 days, they're living in a new life. They're living in a whole new environment. And so if you think 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day, or 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts as the day before, well, the same thoughts lead to the same choices. Same
Mhm.
choices lead to the same behaviors. The same behaviors create the same experiences. And the same experiences produce the very same feelings and emotions. And they tend to influence our very same thoughts and our biology and our circuitry and our chemistry, our hormones. And even our gene expression stays the same because we're staying the same.
Mhm.
So give people new information, have them think about that information, share it with the person next to them so they can understand if learning is making the connection, remembering is maintaining and sustaining it. And you got to fire and wire the thought and remind yourself of what you learned. So that begins to build the model of understanding. Think differently, have people make different choices, do different things, create new experiences, and feel new emotions. And at the end of 7 days, there's such a dramatic change in their biology that they literally look like a different person.
Hmm. I always want to ask you this personally. We just haven't really talked a lot since it happened. So this is just a broad question. Um, my dad, my dad passed away of cancer. You and I have talked about this. Now, this is just a broad question, stuff that I want to ask you stuff you don't always get asked. So, um, my dad was a beautiful man, wonderful man, but like a deep worrier, Joe. A little bit of what you see in me sometimes when we talk, but my dad was like a chronic worrier. I would often hear my dad, like, he'd be sitting on the couch, Joe. We would like sigh, but nothing was actually going on, but like a deep, like, you know, I wondered, my dad died relatively young of cancer. Do you believe that those types of chronic thoughts can turn on a genetic predisposition to somebody to disease? I know that's a broad and, people would pin you down type question, but if someone's new thoughts and new actions and new behaviors in a group can change their biology, I'm wondering if somebody in isolation of their own thoughts that are negative or detrimental to them could turn on biology that could be disease based.
Sure, I think it's a great question. I'll answer the question not in terms of your dad, but just
Sure.
theoretically in what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, but think about this. Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. We have an innate mechanism in the autonomic nervous system that does one job, and that's to regulate the body back into balance. So then you have a threat, you have a danger, you have a crisis, you can't control something, you can't predict something, you have the perception that something's going to get worse in your life. And you switch on that primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system, and it mobilizes enormous amounts of energy for an emergency. And the brain goes into an aroused state, and the body gets a rush of energy. And over time, we kind of get addicted to that rush of energy. And so many people use the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotion, and they become addicted to the life they don't even like. And the arousal is what's keeping them putting all their attention on all the people and objects and things and places in their life. Okay, so the long-term effects of the hormones of stress, your response to the environment could actually weaken your biology because you're consuming an enormous amount of energy and your body's switching on. Your heart is racing, blood is sent to the extremities, um, digestive juices are shutting down, the brain goes into an altered state. In the short term, that's very adaptive. But
Mm,
when you turn on the stress response and you can't turn it off, now you're headed for disease because that imbalance becomes the new balance. And so the body never gets a chance to return back to order. And that's what disease is, right? So,
mm,
so the brain gets incoherent, the heart gets incoherent. And then when we're under stress and we're living in survival, when we think about our problems, when we imagine some future worst case scenario in our mind, or we revisit a past memory, when we bring that thought to life, I mean, we attend to it, we put all our attention on it. We begin to make the same chemistry in the brain and body as if the event was happening. And the
mm,
body's so objective, it doesn't know the difference between the real life experience that's creating that emotional response
mm,
and the emotional response that that person is having by thought alone.
mm,
So
mm,
the body's believing it's living in that exact environment, and the environment signals the gene. And the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion.
mm,
So then you can get addicted to your own thoughts. And if you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, and the hormones of stress downregulate genes and create disease, then your thoughts could make you sick. And if your thoughts could make you sick, the real fundamental question is, can your thoughts make you well? And we discovered that if you can teach a person to manage their attention, to learn how
mm.
to remanage their attention and remanage their energy and catch themselves going to that worst case scenario in the future
Yeah.
and catch themselves and bring their awareness back to the present moment. And if they can, if they notice they're getting aroused, that they notice they're getting impatient, they notice they're getting frustrated, and instead of quitting and saying, I can't do this, it's too hard, to sit with themselves and work on lowering the volume to that emotion and settling the body back into the present moment. What we discovered that the act of doing that is reconditioning the body to a new mind. And sooner or later, the body surrenders and there's a liberation of energy. So teaching a person to get to that place and then imagine a different future and do the exact same thing instead of the worst case scenario.
Mhm,
Feel the emotion of that future before it happens.
mhm,
The stronger the emotion you feel, the more you'll remember that thought, the more you
mhm,
remember that image, and you're branding it neurologically in the brain. But there's an emotional response that's going into the body again, and the body's so objective, it believes it's living in a new environment, and the environment signals the gene, and so they're changing their biology by thought alone. And
mm.
we've seen people go from one state of mind and body to another state of mind and body in 7 days. And the outcomes that I've witnessed have
Yeah,
surprised me. Like I
I know.
can't believe it. It's really insane. So I've seen in the last couple of years since we've been together, I've seen people heal from uh, I know it's hard to believe, but like stage 4 cancers that had spread to their bones and to their
Mhm,
organs, blind people seeing, deaf people hearing, people with ALS, uh, muscular dystrophy. I mean, rare genetic disorders, Parkinson's disease. I've seen really incredible things happen.
Can I say
Uh,
something about that, by the way,
yeah,
for
sure.
everybody's benefit? A couple things I want to just reiterate, everyone. By the way, that are just incredible. The first thing is that you say that there's an actual arousal that takes place to the addiction of a thought that still doesn't serve you, everybody. That is so counterintuitive that you become aroused by thoughts and behaviors and a chemistry in your body that still doesn't serve you. That's incredible. Number one, he says these things that you just want to unpack. Two, he said that that if you can recondition the body, that it will actually create a new mind and that eventually the body surrenders. That's a powerful thing. Just the understanding of that, everyone. And then the last thing I want you all to know that even if you didn't believe what Joe just said about the fact that stage 4 cancer or blindness, let me tell you something. I've been with Joe privately on my plane in different places. I can tell you that he believes that very deeply. He is so damn excited about what he's been seeing at these events over the last few years. This is not for show. This is not something to sell a seminar. This man has seen these things and has, I mean, I've watched him shaking. I've watched water in his eyes. I've watched, you feel energy off somebody, like exuberance and joy, and frankly, shock and awe from him. Like, you're not going to believe it. I can't believe this. And then he says, we'll test it. And so I just want you all to know that. So, hey, guys, I want to jump in here for a second and talk about change and growth. And, by the way, it's no secret how people get ahead in life or how they grow. And also taking a look at the future. If you want to change your future, you got to change the things you're doing. If you continue to do the same things, you're probably going to produce the same results. But if you get into a new environment where you're learning new things and you're around other people that are growth oriented, you're much more likely to do that yourself. And that's why I love Growth Day. Write this down for a second. growthday.com/ed. My friend Brendan Bouchard has created the most incredible personal development and business app that I've ever seen in my life. Everything from goal setting software to personal accountability, journaling, courses, thousands of dollars worth of courses in there as well. I create content in there on Mondays where I contribute, as do a whole bunch of other influencers, like the Avengers of influencers and business minds in there. It's the Netflix for high achievers or people that want to be high achievers. So go check it out. My friend Brennan's made it very affordable, very easy to get involved. Go to growthday.com/ed. That's growthday.com/ed. The other thing, Joe, I want to ask you before we keep going is, how you said they're basically on this unconscious program. So specifically, is it meditation? Is it group meditation? I know you teach all these different things, but for someone listening to a podcast for the first time, or maybe it's the third time they've heard you on my show, how does somebody become more conscious and awake and less asleep and unconscious?
Yeah, so that's been my discovery, and my interest really is to demystify the process of change and transformation. And we use meditation as the model to transform and change, not in any spiritual, colloquial way, no traditional way. I don't study any of that. I study the science. I look at the science, and we've got enough data to speak with a little bit more conviction. But if you keep thinking the same way, you keep acting the same way, and you keep feeling the same way, by the time you're in the middle of your life, you're programmed.
Yeah.
And your brain becomes hardwired to certain attitudes and beliefs and perceptions. Your behaviors become more predictable, more habituated, more automatic, more programmed.
Mhm.
And your emotions that you live by every single day become the feeling that you feel as you, that you've become accustomed to. So 95% of who you are by the time you're in the middle of your life is a set of unconscious programs. So now, if you want to change, it's not just thinking positively. That's not it. You have to unlearn. You have to break the habit of being yourself. You have to unfire and unwire. And it takes an enormous amount of awareness and energy to do that, because most people, when that thought comes up that says, I can't, it's too hard, it's my mother's fault, I'll never change, life is too difficult, something's wrong with me. Instead of giving up on that thought, what we discovered, if a person is having that thought and they can sit with that thought long enough to no longer accept it, believe it, surrender to it without analyzing, actually come right up against Goliath, and that's a program, and you have to settle that thought down, and that takes energy to do that. And if a person's been waking up in the morning and remembering their problems every single day, and those problems are memories that are etched in their brain that are connected to certain people, certain objects, certain things, certain times, certain places, the moment they're remembering their problem, they're thinking in the past. And every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So the moment they feel unhappy, the moment they feel discouraged, the moment they feel unworthy, now the body's in the past. Because thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body, and how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. So now that thought and feeling, that image, that emotion, that stimulus and response is conditioning the body to be the mind of that emotion. And the body's believing it's living in the past. That's how objective it is. That's how it is the unconscious mind. So then to step outside of the familiar feeling takes that same amount of energy and awareness, because the feeling is keeping us behaving in the past and thinking in the past.
Mm.
So then the body then you have to become so conscious of that feeling of guilt or that feeling of unworthiness that you would never go unconscious to it in your waking day. Now that's the work, right? So the
Mm.
overcoming process is the becoming process, and the unlearning process is we have to learn how to get into the operating system where all those programs exist. And we discovered a formula to be able to do that, that there's a way to begin to change your brain function so you get beyond your analytical mind, and now you're in the operating system to rewrite the program.
Mhm.
And it takes a little practice, but people learn how to do it in a very short amount of time. Okay, so we use meditation as the model to change, not to heal, because when you
Okay.
change, you heal, right? So
Mm.
so you can't just think positively. There's this overcoming process that's a 95% that we're unconscious to, and the only way you can do that is sit with yourself,
Mm.
and you got to come up against you. And you got to learn how to, when the body gets aroused and emotional, you have to learn how to settle it down until it's no longer the mind, that you're the mind. Not get up and grab your cell phone or scroll or make a phone call or get up and do something. And this is the time where you're going to have to work with your body. You're going to train the animal. And then
Mm.
it's always going to try to anticipate and predict something new, known in your life. It's going to try to expect the next thing. It's going to try to figure it out. And so the brain is an anticipation machine, catching yourself wanting to get up and do something instead of get up and do something. Settle your body back into the present moment. Now you're executing a will that's greater than the program. And it's the laboring in that way that sooner or later, like training an animal, sooner or later, the body acquiesces to a new mind. And there's literally a liberation of energy. So the word
Mm.
meditation means to become familiar with,
Mm.
to become so conscious
Mm.
of your unconscious self that you don't default in your waking day and go unconscious.
Mm.
And you got to disconnect from your outer world, and you got to forget about your body, and you can't be thinking about time in order to do that. And so then the next fundamental question is, okay, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And with intention and with attention, I'm going to keep reminding myself to think this way. I'm going to keep remembering to think this way.
Mm.
And nerve cells that fire together wire together. You start installing circuitry in your brain. Keep doing it over and over again. It becomes more like a software program, and a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again. Now you have
Mm.
a new belief that you're installing in your brain. It's the new voice in your head that says you can. Okay. So, what we discovered with people that have healed from many different health conditions and transformed is that their 1 hour of meditation wasn't enough, because they had to get so good at doing it with their eyes closed, they had to be able to do it with their eyes open. In
Mm.
other words, how am
Yeah.
I going to be with my ex? How am I going to be with my coworker? How am I going to be when I'm alone? I'm not, if I default and I start behaving in the same way, my disease will come back because I'm the same person. My
Mm.
personality creates my personal reality. If I want to create a new personal reality, I got to change my personality. I can't
Mhm.
go unconscious, right? So,
Yeah.
so they started to rehearse in their mind and imagine, how am I going to be? What piece of knowledge or information? How could I modify my experience by
Mm.
doing something differently with my coworker, with my ex? What would love do? What would greatness look like? Could I forgive? Let me rehearse it in my mind. And the act of mental rehearsal, when it's done properly, the brain doesn't know the difference between what you're imagining in your mind and actually the physical event. There's research to show that you could literally change your brain just by thinking about these things. And the brain will look like you already did it. The brain will look like the experience already happened. Now you're priming the brain.
Mm.
So you have circuitry in place to use. And if you can get your behaviors to match your intentions, during your waking day, you're going to have a new experience, and that new experience is going to create a new feeling and a new emotion. So, what would that feeling be if you can go from resentment or judgment? You got to open your heart. And we discovered that when you teach people how to do this and they begin to open their heart, they diminish those survival stress hormones, because the heart resets the baseline in the brain to tell the brain the trauma is over, the event is over, the stress is over. It
Mm.
literally resets the baseline. And when the person's feeling the emotion of their future before it happens, they're beginning to change their gene expression in very, very profound ways. Get that person to continue to think that way, continue to act that way, continue to feel that way. They'll begin to become familiar with a new self. They'll be firing and wiring those circuits, and they'll be emotionally conditioning their body. Okay, stop feeling the chemicals of resentment. Well, I'm
Mm.
addicted. Yeah. Well, you're going to go through some withdrawals, no doubt about it. Your
Mm.
body's going to want to try to talk you back into feeling that way. And it's going to try to talk to your mind and say, remember this event and feel this way and think this way. That's the work, right?
Mm.
But when the person is stopping that emotional state and saying, okay, well, what would love do? Okay, let me see if
Yeah.
I could actually feel it. If I understand that I could feel the emotion
Mm.
ahead of the actual event, and we
Mm.
ask a person to have the intention, 100% of the people who
Mm.
have the intention to signal a gene actually signal that gene.
Crazy.
And so that's how powerful intention is when the body and mind are in the right state. So we discovered through just the research that we've been doing that it's outstanding. It's showing people on so many levels that the power lives within them. And it's not just in human testimony, but it's in a lot of the science that we've been doing.
Hey guys, when you think about businesses growing beyond their forecast, you could think about something like Feastables by Mr. Beast, right? Or even a legacy business like Mattel. And obviously, you think about the product they have to have and branding and the influence and all that other stuff. But what most people don't think about enough is the behind the scenes. And the behind the scenes of businesses, things like making things easier for shoppers, buying, etc., is really simple. And for millions of businesses, including mine, that business is Shopify. I don't even know what I would do without them when it comes to my books, my gear. Basically, everything we do goes through Shopify, just like Mr. Beast or Mattel or many of the other big brands that you know. So nobody does it better than Shopify, number one checkout place on the planet, and the not so secret Shop Pay, which boosts conversions by 50%. All these things come only with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Mr. Beast gets with Feastables at Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial period at shopify.com/Mylett, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Mylett to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Mylett. Do you think when people hear source, I got to tell you something. A lot of my Christian friends, and you know that I'm a Christian, you and I've talked about this, almost feel guilty sometimes that they benefit from your work. I know you've heard this before. This is not and so when someone says they're the source, this is a non-religious term, meaning that change can happen from within you, everybody. This is not to say that you can't have a particular faith or denomination. I just want to make sure everybody understands that from my perspective, because I know some of you would ask me this. But there's evidence of this in the body. Joe, educate me about this. You said that some of these proteins begin to change in the collective group when they're there. And there's this, I'll mess it up, but you always fix it for me when I do it. There's this serpin A5 protein that can happen when you meditate. And why does that matter and what is it? And that is some proof that biologically somebody's changing when they're going through this process, correct?
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you the short story here.
Okay. Okay.
When when the pandemic happened,
Yep.
we partnered with the University of California, San Diego, the Department of Anesthesiology, and we had reputable scientists that, by the way, were skeptical
I
uh,
remember.
in what we were doing.
Yep.
And we drew blood and we did all these experiments, and then the lab closed because of the pandemic, and we were like, what are we going to do with this blood? And one of the lead scientists said, "Well, there's a lab here. We can create." What we had seen dramatic changes, first of all, in the plasma of novice meditators, like dramatic changes at the end of 7 days, and like where their blood was completely different. They were regulating quite a bit of gene expression, and one in particular was just way outside of normal. And so we decided to take his blood and put it in the presence of a pseudovirus that behaved just like SARS-CoV-2. And when we put the plasma in the presence, what was called an adaptive transfer, and ACE2 receptors, we noticed that the virus, the CoV-2 virus, could not enter the
Mm.
cell. There was an immunity that was
Mm,
taking place. And then we were like, there's some information in the blood
mm,
of both novice and advanced meditators that's inhibiting the virus from entering the cell. And it looked like a fuzz that was just staying outside the cell. We did electron microscopy and we looked and primarily in advanced meditators, we saw just there was somehow a resistance. And so when we looked to see what it was in the blood by just a series of different scientific experiments, we isolated this protein called serpin A5, and serpin A5 acts against the receptor that allows the COVID virus to enter the cell. So the protein would attach to the cell and stop the cell from cleaving the spikes off so it could enter. So it was an inhibitory protease, and it was dramatic in elevation. And so we kind of came across this molecule, and we started looking to see it, and it was used yeah, as there was experiments being done to look to see if it could have a great effect on SARS.
that's crazy to me. That's just unreal to me. What do you do when you're going through a real problem, Joe, like you? So not this thing where we're imagining a future that's not serving us and it's the familiar us and we're going back to it. I assume you would say that, well, when I go through stress now, there's a new familiar me that's resilient, that has optimistic thought, et cetera. But so forget an imagined thing. Someone's listening to this right now and they go, I got it. Okay, I'm going to get to an event. By the way, you should go. And we were just talking beforehand. Joe can't find facilities large enough around the world to fill his events anymore. It's unbelievable. But someone sitting here saying, I want to start with change, but I'm going through a real thing. Like I just lost my job, or I just lost my half my money in the stock market, or I have family in Gaza or Israel or Ukraine, or I'm going through a real thing right now. What would you say to somebody, or even you personally, when you go through real difficulty in the present moment? What do you do when you go through that time?
Yeah, I think I've learned enough through trial and error that if I'm in stress, then I'm out of balance.
Okay.
And the refractory period that's created from that emotional response, if I can't control that, then I'm out of balance. And being out of balance is really not a time to choose. It's
Mm,
not a time to be creative.
mm,
It's not a time to be innovative. It's really a primitive system where you're really going to run, fight, or hide, and you're going to force and control outcomes or fight for them, compete for them, rush to them because that's what you do when you're living in stress and living in survival. So for me, I think the greatest thing that I could do is get myself back in the balance. And one of the ways I do that is to close my eyes and I have to get beyond every single thing in my outer environment, all the people and objects and things. And it takes a little time because when you're in stress and you're in survival, your mind's going, it's shifting attention from one person to another object to another possibility to another thing you need to do. And every one of those things are neurological networks in the brain. So the brain from the arousal starts firing very incoherently. And we're a house divided against ourselves. So we discovered that there's a way to create more coherence in the brain. So before I would ever make a decision, before
okay.
I would ever do anything, I would work on getting and managing my attention and managing my energy. I'd have to get beyond my body, if it was urgent and rushing and frustrated or fearful or whatever, then I know that that state is not a creative state where possibility exists, right? And so I'm
Mm,
not going to be at my best because in that state where I'm altered, if I send the email, if you
yeah.
send the text,
Yeah.
you leave the voicemail,
Yep.
you do something, you're always going to say the same thing. I should have never, ever, ever did that because you're not yourself. You're in an altered state, right?
Yeah.
Through the whole entire process, Ed, we kind of came down to a simple formula of brain and heart coherence. And there's a really simple formula. It's
Okay.
relaxed in the heart. And we discovered the more relaxed you can get in the heart, the more the brain gets awake. And
Mm,
you move out of stressed out, unconscious, and being in a program to be in your heart. And your heart's your creative center. It's
okay.
it's where wholeness starts. And
Mm,
when you begin to open your heart, we discovered that there's a wave of energy that goes to the brain and it
Mm,
tells the brain it's time to create. You're no longer in stress and you're no longer in survival. And
mm,
we discovered if people were able to sustain the state for an extended period of time in all shapes, all sizes, all ages, all colors, all walks of life, anybody can do it. That if they could sustain that state for an extended period of time, not too long, but at a minimum of 15 minutes, the
really?
more they could relax into their heart, the more energy would go into the brain. The brain would start becoming like a harmonic, like
Hmm.
there were slower brain waves that were carrying faster brain waves, which are harmonics carrying faster brain waves, which are harmonics. So you see this very heightened state of what's called gamma brainwave patterns.
Right.
And that's super conscious. That's super aware. That's not
Mm,
stressed out, unconscious, and being in a program.
yeah.
That's really seeing a possibility you could never see before. So for me, if it takes me a week of every single day getting there, I know that the decision I'm going to make when I'm not in that state is going to be familiar to me. It's not going to be anything new. It's going to be more of the same. So if it takes me a week, if it takes me 3 times a day,
Mm,
and,
mm,
and I'm not saying that what I'm saying is to myself, I'm not going to need the drug or
yeah.
the external thing that's going to do this. I got to do this myself. I got to really work on regulating my body back into homeostasis and balance. And from that place, if I'm truly in my heart, um, then I think I could communicate better.
Yep.
I think I could collaborate better. I think I'm more creative in that state. I'm more willing to let things go
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
hold on, because that's
Yeah.
like drinking poison and hoping the other person's going to die. Like the
Yes.
only person that emotion is affecting is you, dude. Nobody else. It's
Yeah.
only harming you,
Yeah.
justified or not.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. So for me, I'm like, I know better. So I always
Mhm,
say, like, dude, how long are you going to keep this going for? Like, you want to
mm,
do this? How long? How long do you
mhm,
want to do this? Right.
mm. Yeah.
And so if an addiction is something you can't stop, think you can't stop, or an addiction is knowing something isn't good for you and doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Now that you know, you can't not know. And you
Mm,
can't say it's that person or that circumstance that's controlling my feelings and my thoughts. If I say that I'm a victim in my
mm,
life, right? Because then when
mm,
things are good, I feel good. When things are bad, I feel bad. Like that's not the experiment. The experiment is to change the way I think I feel and see if it changes my life, right? So,
mhm.
so I know better at this point, and so if it, I don't really care how long it takes. Uh, I just know that if I stay at it for enough of a period of time, then I think I'm more genuinely in a place where I can resolve things in my life, and I'm not so attached to the way I think it should go. And sometimes that's the best thing to do is kind of lay down what we've used our whole life to get what we want, for really opening to the possibility of something greater could happen. And I think that's not an easy process, but I
You
think it's worth the effort.
you literally answered my next question. I love when we're in brain and heart coherence together. I I'm asking this question for a reason, and that is, what's the ultimate outcome here? In other words, is it normal, appropriate, and okay for a person who's done all the work that you've put them through and that they've experienced with you to still feel emotions of sadness, angst, fear, and anger from time to time? Or is the only success the absence of those emotions? And I ask this for this reason. I feel a lot of people have made progress through their meditative processes, gone to your events, but I've talked to some that go, yeah, and then I had this event and I was super stressed and worried and almost feel like I didn't really make the progress that I thought I made, as if perhaps you'll never experience worry, fear, anger, stress ever again in your life if you're this perfectly evolved human being. Now, I'm
No,
being serious about it because I
no,
think
no,
you know this. I've been around you. You and I have been together in stressful situations.
but I never said to not react. What I'm saying is how
Yeah.
long?
Yep.
How long are you going to do that for? Because
Yeah.
more than likely, We've seen on brain scans that when you're in that emotional state,
Yeah.
and you're trying to figure out your life, or you're analyzing your life within that emotion, 100% of the time you're going to make your brain worse because you're
Mm,
thinking in the past, and the brain is actually getting aroused by your thoughts, right? So you move out of these, you move into higher and higher states. So it's not like I mean, I think it's healthy to react. I react and then you go on. But the stronger the emotion we feel to some problem or circumstance in our life, the more altered we are inside of us, the more we pay attention to what's causing it, right?
mm,
So then I'm not saying to not react. I'm saying if you keep that going and you keep reviewing and thinking about it,
yeah.
you're knocking your brain and body out of balance by thought alone. And sooner or later, you have to ask yourself, is this loving to me?
Mm,
And and
mm.
it
So good. So good.
yeah, and it's not worth the effort. So what the science shows is that just like any addiction, when you break an addiction, some people overdose, some people are on
Mm,
bad trips. And when you break an addiction, the body is craving the emotion. And it just turns out if you can hang in there
mm,
just for a few days and you keep lowering the volume to that emotion, I promise you sooner or later you're going to take your attention off that person or that problem. And when you do, you're calling energy back to you. You're taking your power back in your
mm,
life. So I don't think reacting is bad.
mm.
I just think that when you keep tempering the body, your volume of anger will be lowered to a great degree. So your response will be like, and then like,
Yeah.
whatever, but
Yeah.
you had it, right? It's
Yeah.
not like you don't go into the moment you feel the emotion, you're going to behave like you're in the past. That's just what the
It's
emotion does.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. So, as an adult, are you carving out time, on a weekly basis to learn new things and to grow and do it as often as you like? Or is the day-to-day kind of getting you so busy that you forget to ever recapture that kind of childlike joy and enthusiasm you had in your life? Just like the wonder of being a child again. And one of the things that, if you really want to change things in your life, you should look at therapy. What I love about BetterHelp is it can be done online. If you don't vibe with the therapist, you can switch at any time. And therapy can really help you connect with kind of your sense of wonder again. Get back to that childlike joy and enthusiasm you had. Therapy is helpful for learning different things about life, but also learning about yourself and becoming more self-aware. So here's all you got to do. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime you want for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/edshow today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/edshow. I gotta tell you guys, I'll give you an inside story about Joe. So we're flying one time. I'm flying him somewhere on my plane. No, but I watched him real life. Just to give you guys a real anecdote, because Joe's this just amazing guy. So we're flying, we're on, this sounds like, I don't know. We were on my plane. And so we were flying to Mexico. And my pilot decided to put Joe's bag on someone else's airplane, not my airplane. So we get to Mexico and Joe's bag, I think it was in Texas. I don't remember where it went, but it was a
No,
very stressful
it
situation. He
was
had to
in
get on a,
Utah,
it was in Utah. Okay.
southern Utah.
And he has to get on a boat. This is pretty stressful stuff, like, and I'd be flipping out, but I watched him under this stress deal with it with some elegance. It wasn't perfect, the situation wasn't perfect, but also to find the solution as quickly as he could. And I remember watching that, thinking to myself, there's something about him that this is what I thought was happening, and then I'll let you speak to it. I watched this in real life with you, and it was an interesting situation. We both had a glass of wine by that time too, I think. But um, you were, I almost felt like you thought your energy could transform the matter of the situation. Almost like you focused on energy over matter, which is kind of part of your work. But I really felt like you thought if you sent the right energy at this, I'm using my terminology, Joe, but you know what I mean, that
Yeah.
it could shift the circumstances of the physical situation that was taking place. So that's sort of a long way to ask you about matter versus energy and the different focus on that. But I think I saw an example of that with you to some extent.
I had one of two choices: to be victimized by the circumstances, like, and feel
Mhm.
bad and do all that stuff. But I
Mm,
have to ask myself, like, my archetype of what a master is always evolving. So the
mm,
fundamental question then becomes, what would a master do, dude? Like, what
mm,
would a master do? Like,
mm,
and I honestly believe that thoughts do have an effect. I think thoughts objectify and condition space. I think they produce effects in our lives. I've seen too many examples of it in the work that we do.
Hmm.
So now's the time you go from philosopher to initiate, right? This is the
Right,
time
right, right.
where it's no longer, this is no longer like,
Yep,
that we're going to do this in this situation. This is like, this is the time to do it. Like
yeah,
you learn all the stuff is this is the opportunity. Like,
yep.
it's not like it's never going to be the right time. And this, of course, could have been the default. So I thought,
Hmm.
listen, I have a very short amount of time before this boat takes off.
Yeah, you had a boat.
And and I thought, my gosh, the best thing I could do is see it arriving and then
Mm.
feel the emotion of what that would feel like
Mm,
instead of feeling the other emotion. And
mm,
if I do it really well, I think the universe has a much bigger mind than I do.
mm.
Maybe you could figure out a way that I haven't thought of that it could arrive. And then we got a call from the pilot, and
Yep,
he was going to fly down
yep,
with bags.
yep.
So now you may say, well, that was, that whatever that, well, I saw it this way, or maybe you didn't create it, but it didn't matter to me because it's my life.
Mm,
I believe that we do have some effect in the life that we create. And I'm just not talking about parking spaces. And I'm not talking about like, oh, I was thinking of my roommate and she called me. I'm not talking about that. I'm
mm,
talking about bigger synchronicities
mm,
that we actually have a hand in.
mm.
And when sometimes it's the hardest, I think it matters the most. I think because that's the initiation, right? Life is the initiation. So, what
Yeah,
piece of knowledge, what piece of philosophy, what piece of theory could I apply to this situation
right, right.
to see if I actually can change an outcome? And that's an experiment, and it's an
Mm,
ongoing experiment that I think is worthy of trying. And if it doesn't work, I tried. And I'll do
yeah,
it, and I'm not going to not stop trying because I've seen too many people do really amazing things. So I can't even say that it doesn't work. It's just maybe I'm not good enough, but that doesn't stop me on the journey. I'm
yeah.
always going to be ambitious about the process.
Well, you live the example. So, in a minute, guys, spoiler alert, we're going to ask Joe towards the end here for one of the incredible stories and source that's just he's experienced change in. But before we do that, I've always wanted to ask you this. I don't think I've ever told you this story. When I was really young, I won an incentive trip for the financial firm I was with to go to Hawaii. It's the first trip I'd ever been, first vacation I'd ever been on. I'm running on the beach, Joe, early in the morning. It was so long ago. I was wearing a Sony Walkman and listened to a
Had a
cassette.
few.
I had a few. And I'm running and it's dark out still. It's like 5:30 in the morning. The sun had not risen yet. And there's this guy running towards me and we're going to bump into each other. The beach is very narrow with the tide and he's bald and he's sweaty and I see he's got a hairy back and I'm like, I just don't want to bump this guy. And as he comes by me, we don't bump. It's Wayne Dyer, right? And he's a hero of mine at the time. He'd really made a difference in my life. And so he runs by me and I put my Walkman off. He's about, I don't know, 30 feet down the beach now. I said, Dr. Dyer, you changed my life. And he turns around, he had a voice kind of similar to mine. He goes, I doubt that, but how did I contribute? And he walks towards me and we end up sitting there. He became a friend for life. And we end up sitting on the beach and watch the sunrise together. At the end of it, Joe, he goes, Ed, I think you could change the world. I'm sure he said this to everybody, but to me, it was the only guy he ever said it to. And he goes, I just hope you don't focus on your abilities the rest of your life or any of that external stuff because Ed, or your results, because then you're always trailing it and you'll be subject to the result and your emotion. I said, well, what's one thing I should focus on? He said, your intentions. Your intentions are far more powerful than you'll ever know in your life, Ed. And I think you're a good man. I think you care. I think you have a good heart. And there's a power to intention. Now, as you know, he happened to be writing a book at that time called The Power of Intention. And I feel like to some extent, you've taken that work to a completely different level now, where you actually sort of prove the validity of it. So, talk to us about intentions and the power of them and why they matter.
Ah, okay. When you ask a question like, what would it be like to be a great leader? What would it be like to be in love? What would it be like to be financially abundant? Whatever the question is, what your brain is doing is it's entertaining possibility. And when you ask that open-ended question, you turn on the creative center of the brain, which is the frontal lobe. That's the crowning achievement of the human being. That's where we can make thought more real than anything else.
Mm,
And it has connections to the entire brain. So when you ask that question, if you're willing to sit and explore the answer and contemplate, As the frontal lobe switches on, it looks out over the landscape of the entire brain, and it begins to look for associated neurological networks that it could call on in your brain that's stored there based on something you've learned intellectually or something you've experienced. That's the circuitry. So as it begins to call up these different networks of neurons, if the brain can fire in a different sequence, a different pattern, a different combination, that's the brain in action. That's called mind. You're changing your mind about something. The moment all those neurons fire into tandem, you get an internal representation in your mind, an image in your mind, a picture in your mind, an abstraction. And that's called intention. And you're intending on an outcome, a future that you actually think would be something that you could attain, right? So the more knowledge you have, the more experience you have, the more enriched the vision, right? The more profound, because you can't dream without information. So information is the raw material. And if you're experienced, really experienced, your dream is going to be different than other people philosophically because you've had the experience. All right. So now you have the intention. For the passionate person, I can talk to you about this because I know you. The person who's passionate, who sees that future, will begin to feel the emotion of that future. And the moment they feel the emotion of that future, they're giving their body a taste of the future. They're giving it a sampling of the future. And the stronger the emotion you feel, as I said, just like when you remember a past event, you have a trauma, betrayal, a shock that changes your internal state. The more altered you are, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot. That's called a long-term memory. So then, just like that, if the amplitude of that emotion is greater than the betrayal or trauma, and the body comes out of its resting state, the intention now carries energy. And that's a very powerful signal to the body. The body's in that moment getting conditioned to a new mind. And that's the moment where you say, no person, no circumstance, nothing in my life is going to talk me out of that future. There's nothing. I felt it. I felt it. And that feeling is true to the person. It turns out the outcome of that, first of all, changes a person's biology instantaneously. That's the moment their healing begins. That's their moment. That's their moment where they're generating wealth. That's the moment where they're actually in a creative, undeniable state of affirmation. I am this. And the brain and body are aligned to a destiny. The game is to be able to reproduce that feeling when you're tired, when you have a headache, when your day didn't go right, you had a fight with your partner, whatever. The person who is passionate about that future has to keep that vision alive in their mind because it's so much easier to forget it than to remember it. But if you don't come out of your resting state, the body will never get a taste of the future. So there was an experiment done where they took a group of healers, meditators, and they had this DNA and they had it all wound up, and they said, with all of your intention, visualize the DNA winding or unwinding over and over again. They did it for a period of time, and they checked the DNA, and intention did nothing. It made no change in the DNA. And they said, okay, now open your hearts and radiate love and trust and compassion and care and kindness, and just radiate it out to the DNA. And when they radiated this elevated emotion, it did nothing to the DNA. But when they said to them, have the intention of the DNA regulating, winding or unwinding, and feel the emotion of what it would feel like when it did, a very large percentage of the DNA began to unwind naturally. So the thought in the quantum field is the electrical charge. And the feeling that we feel is the magnetic charge. And how you think and how you feel broadcasts an electromagnetic signature that influences every single atom in your life. The intention is the signal out. And the elevated emotion is what draws it back to us. So then, why is that important? Because if you're going to send out a very clear signal into the quantum field, your brain better be coherent. It can't be firing incoherently by the hormones of stress because there's static on the wire. There's no Wi-Fi signal. There's static. So you got to regulate the brain back into coherence. Now you can have a very strong intention. Get your heart really coherent, and it starts beating coherent. It's like a drum. It just starts emitting a huge magnetic field.
Mm.
So if you're going to begin to create the life you want by changing your energy better be coherent, and brain and heart coherence creates that Wi-Fi signal. Do that as an experiment and maintain that state. And imagine you're just in a big, big in jello. You're resonating, you're vibrating, everything's vibrating because you are.
Mm.
So then if you can maintain that modified state of being, then the exciting part is,
Wow.
can I shorten the distance
Mm.
between the thought of what I want and the experience of having it by creating from the field instead of from matter, by changing my energy? And I'm telling you, when you change your energy, you change your life. And nobody changes until they change their energy. And so, in fact, nothing changes in our life until we change. But practicing the brain and heart coherence, now you're putting out a very clear signal into the field. So intention is one element, but marrying it with that elevated emotion changes the field, changes our brain, changes our biology, changes our
Okay.
heart, changes our immune system. I could go down the list. It changes our
Okay.
microbiome. It changes, all kinds of factors in the blood. Everything
Yeah.
changes.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I have three things. One's quick, two will be a little bit longer. Just quick thing on heart brain coherence. So, hey guys, one of the things I love is when technology can revolutionize an old industry. And I think we'd all agree one of the industries that needs a lot of revolution in a lot of ways is the medical industry. And ZocDoc's doing that in this sense. I love it. One of the hardest things to do in the world is to find a doctor that you click with that takes your insurance, by the way, and that's local. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment, typically in 24 to 72 hours. We're talking about in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care to skin care, and much more. Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/Mylett to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/Mylett. ZocDoc.com/Mylett. When you're looking at someone's heart and brain coherence, are you looking at their heart rate, Joe, their heart rate variability? Do those metrics indicate
Yeah,
something?
we're looking at heart rate variability,
You are.
and
HRV. Okay.
it is an indicator of age and longevity and health.
Mm-hmm.
But by the same means, you can actually train a person to move into these beautiful states where the heart has to be able to variate. If it cannot vary,
Mm-hmm.
then more than likely we're stuck, right? So
Okay.
so let me see if I can say it a different way.
Okay.
When you can train your body to be so relaxed, relaxed that your heart is no longer in protection mode. It's no longer in survival mode.
Yeah.
Energy naturally will move right into the center.
Mm.
And when it does, there's a flow of blood.
Mm.
There's a flow of energy. It's just like when blood moves into the sexual organs, it has a very specific consciousness and a very specific intention.
Mm.
With the same intensity, when it moves into your heart, it's a different consciousness, and you feel incredibly selfless. You're more prone to give. You're
Yeah.
more prone to love. You're more prone to serve
Yeah.
in that way. So we work on getting to this state where the heart can sustain
Mm.
that state. And we have evidence where people do it so much that they're wearing a 24-hour monitor and they're not even in a meditation. They're getting ready for bed, and all of a sudden you just see this beautiful band
That's
of
awesome.
heart coherence that lasts for like an hour. And
That's
they're not
awesome.
even in a meditation, just like having a panic attack
Mm-hmm.
where you're conditioning your body to become the
Yeah.
mind of fear because you're always anticipating the worst case scenario. You program the body to automatically react in fear. You can't control it with your conscious mind. It's programmed subconsciously. Now you're
Mm.
programming the body to have a spontaneous love attack.
I love it.
And I think that when that occurs, we're more prone to get along with one another.
Sure.
We're more prone to love one another, to serve one another, care for one another, heal one another, support one another. I think that's what creates pro-social networks that turn on
Yeah.
in the brain, where we kind of move closer, we connect, we commune, we appreciate each other, We
Yeah.
appreciate the moment more when we're not in survival. So getting out
Yeah.
of survival is the work, right?
It's the
That's the
work.
animal self. Yeah.
I don't surprised you never got asked this before. It could be a quick answer, it could be a long answer. I don't care. And maybe you don't have a strong opinion about it. Loosely connected to your world is this world where there's a lot of people that are experimenting with exogenous chemicals to create transformation in their brains or their bodies. I'm thinking of mushrooms. I'm thinking of psilocybin, ayahuasca, LSD. Do you have any opinions about that? And or into maybe one over the other, none of them? Do you have an opinion about that stuff?
I think it's I haven't really spent a lot of time personally doing it. I've done a few things. Um, I think it's great to give people a perspective outside of themselves and
Mhm.
to think greater than how they typically feel. And
Okay.
I think it's a window that opens up to help people see that there's more to reality than meets the eye. And I mean, the probability that we're seeing the truth of reality is zero. I mean, it is zero. That's
Zero.
science. So it gives them a perspective. And so we've worked with thousands and thousands of prison inmates. We've worked with the military veterans and Navy SEALs. We work with trauma. We work with people with some difficulties. And sometimes we discovered that the person's on their 63rd journey and their life is still horrible. Even though
Mhm.
they have the insight and all this other stuff, the insight never changes their behavior. So if it's done in ceremony, if it's done with meaning, if it's done with reverence, if it's done with a question and understanding thyself, and then integrating that experience into your life
Mhm.
so that you can change from that experience, I think it's worth it.
Okay.
But the person who becomes reliant on that to escape from their life because they can't make that feeling go away, sooner or later they're going to have to face off with that feeling, because that's the moment where no drug, nothing is making that feeling go away. And this is the awakening of the soul
Mhm.
in the moment. So now take that and set that aside. In our work, we know that the nervous system is literally the greatest pharmacist that ever was. I can tell you, I'm not saying this, the data is saying this. Your human nervous system can manufacture a pharmacy of chemicals that can work better than any drug. In fact, 3 times better than any drug. That's what our data suggests in the
Mhm.
right state of mind and body. So we have the second half of the week long, we do work with the mystical experience. And
Mhm.
we did fMRI studies. And the fMRI studies show without a doubt that number one, the brain looks like it's on psilocybin, and then when
Mhm.
the person's having a mystical experience, they're not taking any exogenous substance. The brain is highly integrated and highly coherent before the mystical experience. And the default mode network in the brain, the one that's always trying to analyze and predict the next moment based on the past, that's completely shut off. And that's a huge energy consumer. And now, when you don't expect anything, the unexpected happens, and that's the
Mhm.
unknown, right? So
Mhm.
there's pharmacology that goes along with that, because there are derivatives of serotonin and melatonin that are look a lot like melatonin, but are just upgraded molecules, like
Okay.
dimethyltryptamine and
Mhm.
benzodiazepines and chemicals for hibernation and the chemicals that are released in an electric eel that arouse the nervous system into gamma and all these antioxidants. There's just wonderful derivatives that are the outcomes. So our data shows that you can have a full-on sensory experience without using your senses, and you can manufacture those very molecules that are highly mystical to give you a peek between worlds. And the very real life experience that you're having is not altered by any drug. In other words, you're very conscious, in fact, more conscious than you are now. I
Mhm.
mean, if you have a full on sensory experience without your senses, if your senses were heightened, your awareness of reality would be heightened. And
Mhm.
so the emotion that goes along with what we've discovered is the brain moves into these very, 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 I mean, very high states
Mhm.
of coherent gamma brainwave patterns. And 3 standard deviations outside of normal is 2% of the population. That's really good. We're talking hundreds of standard
Wow.
deviations outside of normal in gamma, coherent gamma.
Wow.
And that arousal is not fear. That
Mm.
arousal is not pain. That arousal is not anger or aggression. The arousal is ecstasy. The arousal is connection, is love. There's no language to describe when a person has this kind of change in their physiology. There's such autonomic regulation going on that the body's literally being informed by energy. And the person has a instantaneous, and I mean instantaneous biological upgrade. Like there's the Parkinson's, now it's gone. There's the blindness, now they're seeing. There's the deafness, now they're hearing. There's the 20 years of eczema, now it's gone. There's the myasthenia gravis, it's no longer there. Somehow there's an upgrade that arousal is they're touching something that is beyond language. And we have a language specialist, one of the leading specialists on the language of transformation, who's studying the language of transformation in our work. And he had one of those moments, and he zoomed me and he said, I do not have the language to
Wow.
explain the feelings that I felt. He goes, and this is what we discovered. It's very somatic. Like it's like you feel it in your body physically, like every atom in your body's vibrating, or your body's filled with light, or these examples. My heart exploded, the top of my head blew off. This is very somatic. And then it's highly emotional. Like the
Mm.
word feel it in terms of somatic feeling in my body, like electricity, and somatic, like emotional, like, well, it wasn't love, but it was like way more love than I ever felt in my life. No, maybe it was connection. I don't know. It was bliss. No, it was ecstasy. No, there's no word. Like it's like trying to
Mm.
describe a mango, what it tastes like. You just got to eat it, right?
Mhm.
And so somehow when that person hits that moment and their interaction with energy somehow moves the brain and body literally out of the past.
Mm.
And there's an upgrade in biology, and the person's view of the past completely changes. In other words, they wouldn't change one thing in their past, one thing, because it brought them to that present moment. And I think
Mm.
that's the moment the past no longer exists. So we see that in so many mystical ways, but the person's having an inward experience
Yeah.
that's transcendent. Now, when we draw the blood of people who have these moments, and it's majority of the people, there's a resistance to the COVID virus. There's information in that blood that somehow is a greater level of wholeness, a greater level of order. If we take the plasma of that person and we put it in the presence of a cancer cell, uterine cancer cell, breast cancer cell, a pancreatic cancer cell, it doesn't matter. 70% of the energy in the cancer cell in the mitochondria shuts down. The lights go out. It can't move. It can't multiply.
Mm.
We take the plasma of people who have had that moment. There's information that causes neurogenesis,
Yeah.
growth of new
Yeah.
neurons in the
Yeah.
brain,
Yeah.
downregulates the gene for Alzheimer's.
Mm.
100% of the people produce their own endogenous opiates, natural pain
Mm.
relievers, and,
Mm.
and chemicals that create euphoria for the body.
Mm.
The microbiome is dramatically changed in 7 days. There are at least, I think, between 13 and 18 major probiotic um, microbiome microbiomes that are actually present at the end of 7 days without changing your diet, without removing sugar, without removing alcohol, without taking probiotics. And it suggests that that's not the same person.
Mhm.
If it was the same person, they'd have the same microbiome.
Yeah.
And then thousands of genes somehow tend to be upregulated that bring the body back to wholeness and health. So we've seen that across the board just from one interaction with frequency or energy.
Will we see this in the source? That's sort of my last thing. Like, when is source out, and will we
Sort
see
yeah.
examples of this?
So sources out. We
Okay.
had our uh, uh, launch a couple months ago. I can't remember
Oh, I
exactly
thought
when
I
it
had an
was.
advanced copy that I watched. Okay, so
It
it's
was
out.
an advanced
Okay,
copy.
okay, 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 okay,
Think about
okay.
that. Anyway, anyway, so it's been launched. The reason I didn't have anything to do with it, the data is so compelling. The data is so outstanding that our community organized it, and we had a donor step up from Inner Science, which is our nonprofit that raises money for the analysis of the research that we do, and they wanted to tell that story, like how we have, like, the whole reason, Ed, I started doing all these measurements was simply because I saw people in a weekend workshop
Mm.
um, have a dramatic change in a chronic health condition. And I just had to really say something's happening in there
Yep.
where they just upregulated the gene for health and downregulated the gene for MS. I just saw that. I just saw it happen before my eyes. That's why we started the process. So I think there's nothing like a good story. And
Mm.
so we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories of transformation with people that have healed and changed their life. And that's the
Mm.
4 Minute Mile. So the
Mm.
source, the documentary has 4 or 5 stories of people. We have hundreds of them that they chose to have them tell the story of their diagnosis or how their life was. And then the moment where they connect to something really big. And we ask them, I mean, you're a Christian, you'll understand this.
Mm.
What is it? What
Mm.
is that? What was that? And they're
Mm.
like, source, God, I don't know. It's within. It's the thing that makes up all of this. It's way
Mm.
bigger than me.
Mm.
And so the stories um, uh, are really powerful stories that give people hope. And I think people do the best with what they think is available. And if you don't know something's available, you make the same choice. So
Mm.
it suggests that you have a hand in healing, and the idea, of course, is that all of these people changed. they,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
You combine that now with the science and what we've discovered, and we've partnered with some great other universities like Harvard and Stanford and a few others. Anybody who wants the evidence, like, hey, my wife is really into this, or my husband's really into this. I don't know what they're talking about. They're in some cult, they're lost their mind or whatever, and they can't, wrap their mind around it. Source is a great way for people to get introduced, to this work, because it's very scientifically based. And the scientists were skeptics. The leading scientist was extremely skeptical, and now he's absolutely in. He tells me all the time, I think I have a cure for all of my diseases in the freezer here. It's empirical science. And if you have evidence in science and you have evidence in testimony, I think evidence is the loudest voice. So sourcethefilm.org is where people could see it.
Mhm.
It's about an hour and a half. It's packed with content. And it just, if anything, I hope people walk away with the understanding that people can heal by thought alone.
What an unbelievable hour. My gosh. I'm really grateful for you. Just
I
let's
love
just
seeing you.
I love seeing you. I want to see you in person. I just hope we'll start, we'll just keep doing this about every year. We just reconnect and you update us on your work, because that's about what it's been. About every year Joe comes on, and he's the only person I do this with. Really, I've had Tony on, I guess, that many times as well, but the hour with you always flies by, and I miss it. I would love to get on another airplane with you and lose your bags just so we could have some more time together. So, and by
If
the way,
that's what it
everybody,
takes,
I
if that's what it takes, I'll do
hope
it.
I hope it doesn't do that. Everybody, you can follow Dr. Joe Dispenza on Instagram. You can get him anywhere, and if you can get to one of his events and find a way to do it, you're hearing right from the source here what could happen for you. No pun intended. So, all right, everybody, God bless you. Max out your life.